The day my parents stole my future began with a bank statement slammed onto our kitchen table. "We need $40,000 from your college fund for Sarah's performing arts program," my father announced, not asked, and ended with my quiet, "Okay," that surrendered 2/3 of my $58,742.19 savings to my sister's Broadway dreams. The injustice burned like acid. I'd maintained a 4.2 GPA and volunteered at hospitals for years while Sarah barely passed classes between expensive dance lessons. Yet I was the practical one who could manage with state school, while her talents were apparently too precious to waste. "Family helps family," my mother insisted, her rehearsed smile never reaching her eyes, not realizing how prophetic those words would become when, 10 years later, they would appear on my doorstep, financial ruin in their wake, desperately needing help that only I, the responsible child they'd sacrificed, could provide. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The kitchen in my apartment was small but efficient, much like the rest of my life had become. At 28, I had mastered the art of maximizing limited resources, a skill born of necessity after watching $40,000 of my future vanish to fund my sister's dreams. "More coffee?" I asked Dr. Patel, my research supervisor and mentor, as she reviewed the preliminary data from our latest trial. "Please," she said without looking up. "These results are fascinating, Veronica. The targeted delivery system is showing significantly better efficiency than we projected." I refilled her mug, allowing myself a moment of quiet pride. 2 years into my postdoctoral research at Northeastern Medical Center, and we were making real progress on a drug delivery system that could revolutionize cancer treatment. It wasn't the career path I'd originally envisioned, that had required a different educational trajectory, one that became impossible the day my college fund was reallocated, but I've adapted. Community college for 2 years, then a transfer to State University with a partial scholarship. Working 30 hours a week throughout undergrad to cover living expenses. Graduating with honors despite the obstacles. A fully funded PhD program that recognized my potential despite my unconventional academic journey. Dr. Patel set down the data charts, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "The Foundation Review Board meets next week. If these results hold, I think we have a strong case for expanded funding. That would mean full research team, dedicated lab space, accelerated timeline," she confirmed with a rare smile. "Your project could move from theoretical to clinical trials within 18 months. The possibility sent a surge of excitement through me. This research wasn't just my career, it was my purpose. The delivery system we were developing could reduce chemotherapy side effects by 40%, targeting cancer cells with unprecedented precision. It could change lives, save lives." My phone buzzed on the counter, my sister's name illuminating the screen. I silenced it without answering. "Family emergency?" Dr. Patel asked, eyebrows raised. "No," I replied, returning to my laptop. "Just Sarah's weekly call. I'll get back to her later." Dr. Patel nodded, familiar with the complicated dynamics of my family. In the 3 years we'd worked together, she'd become something between a mentor and a friend, one of the few people who knew the full story of how my educational path had been altered. "How is the Broadway star?" she asked, a hint of sardonic understanding in her tone. "Off-Broadway," I corrected automatically, and still waiting for her big break, apparently. 10 years after Westmore, after consuming my college fund and graduating with a degree in musical theater, Sarah was still chasing her performing dreams in New York. Bit parts in small productions, occasional chorus roles, a commercial or two. Always on the verge of something bigger that never quite materialized. "Your parents must be proud of both of you," Dr. Patel observed, watching me carefully. I shrugged, unwilling to dive into those complex waters. They're proud of Sarah for pursuing her passion. They're relieved I found stability. Relief wasn't pride. It was the emotion you felt when someone managed not to drown despite having their life raft taken away. It was the tacit acknowledgement that I'd overcome the obstacles placed in my path without recognizing who had placed them there. After Dr. Patel left, I finally listened to Sarah's voicemail. Her voice was bright, breathless with excitement. Veronica. Amazing news! I got a call back for that new musical I told you about, the one with the Tony-winning director. This could be IT, the big break I've been waiting for. Can you believe it? Call me back. I set the phone down without returning the call. Of course I could believe it. It was the same call I'd received dozens of times over the years. The big break that was always just around the corner, perpetually out of reach. My laptop chimed with an email notification, the monthly check-in from my parents. They'd moved to Arizona 3 years ago, seeking warmer weather and lower taxes. In retirement. Our communication had dwindled to scheduled video calls every 6 weeks and formulaic email updates, a mutual acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between us. I scanned their message. Updates about their golf games, the new community center, a visiting grandchild from my older brother's family. Beneath the cheerful recounting of retirement activities, I detected an undercurrent of financial concern. References to adjusting to fixed income and unexpected medical expenses that seemed casual but felt deliberate. I closed the email without responding. Years of therapy had helped me establish boundaries with my family to recognize that their problems were not automatically my responsibility. Dr. Chen, my therapist during graduate school, had helped me see the pattern that had been established when my parents took my college fund. The expectation that my needs, my future, would always be secondary to others' wants. You don't owe them your success, she'd told me during one particularly difficult session. You built this life despite the obstacles they created, not because of any support they provided. I believed her. Most days. My phone buzzed again with a text from Alex, my girlfriend of nearly 2 years. Dinner at Lucia's still on for 7? Bringing that research proposal you need to review. I smiled, some of the tension easing from my shoulders. Alex was an intellectual property attorney who specialized in medical patents. We'd met when my department needed legal guidance on a previous research project, and our professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. She understood my work, my drive, and most importantly, she respected the boundaries I'd established with my family. Wouldn't miss it, I texted back. Need anything from the market on my way? As I gathered my materials, preparing to head to my small campus office for the afternoon, my phone rang again. Not Sarah this time, but my parents' number. I hesitated, finger hovering over the ignore button. They rarely called outside our scheduled times. Something must be wrong. With a sigh, I answered. Hello? Veronica. My father's voice sounded strained, lacking its usual forced cheer. We need to talk. It's important. I'm heading to the lab, I said, already feeling the familiar pull of familial obligation. Can it wait until our Sunday call? No. A single syllable, heavy with significance. It's about the house and, well, everything else. I closed my eyes, suddenly understanding the hints in their emails. What's going on, Dad? We've made some financial miscalculations, he said, each word careful, measured. The investments didn't perform as expected, and your mother's medication isn't covered by insurance anymore, and... He stopped, took an audible breath. We're losing the house, Veronica. The silence that followed felt weighted with expectation, with an unspoken request. The same expectation that had been placed on my shoulders 10 years earlier, when I'd been asked to sacrifice my future for my sisters. I'll call you back tonight, I said finally. I need to get to the lab. As I ended the call, I stared at the research proposal on my kitchen counter. The culmination of years of work, of overcoming obstacles, of building something meaningful from the remains of my derailed plans. The irony wasn't lost on me that, just as I was on the verge of my own breakthrough, my family was once again in crisis. 10 years ago, I'd had no choice but to acquiesce when they'd redirected my future. But I wasn't 18 anymore, and the decision before me now was entirely my own. What remained to be seen was whether I'd make a different choice this time. It took me years to understand what really happened that day in our kitchen. Not the surface events, those were clear enough, but the underlying patterns that had been established long before my parents ever asked for my college fund. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The Williams family dynamic had always revolved around Sarah. 3 years older than me, she'd been a force of nature from the moment she first performed in a kindergarten play. While most 5-year-olds mumbled their lines and waved awkwardly at their parents, Sarah commanded the stage with a confidence that made adults pause. "She's special," became the refrain that followed her through childhood OD. Special meant extra attention. Special meant additional resources. Special meant different. Rules? I learned early to carve out my own quiet space in the shadow of her spotlight. While Sarah took dance classes, voice lessons, and acting workshops, I immersed myself in science and mathematics, fields that required no audience, no applause, just problems to solve and solutions to find. My achievements were acknowledged, with quick oats on the back before conversations returned to Sarah's latest audition or callback. My room was a sanctuary of order, amid the chaos of a household centered around performing arts schedules. Bookshelves lined with science texts and medical journals salvaged from library sales. A second-hand microscope purchased with lawn mowing money. A bulletin board meticulously arranged with academic awards and scholarship information. Sarah's room, by contrast, exploded with theatrical energy. Walls plastered with Broadway playbills, shelves crowded with dance trophies, floor perpetually strewn with script pages and costume pieces. Our parents, David and Ellen Williams, had once harbored artistic ambitions themselves. My father had played saxophone in college before practical considerations led him to accounting. My mother had studied art history before settling into elementary school teaching. They recognized in Sarah the talent they believed they had compromised, and in me, they saw the practical path they had ultimately chosen. Without ever stating it explicitly, they had cast us in roles from the beginning. Sarah, the artist who would fulfill their deferred dreams, and me, the practical one who would make sensible choices. The college fund discrepancy had actually started years before that fateful kitchen table conversation. What my parents called my college fund had originally been split evenly between Sarah and me. $500 deposited annually for each child from birth, plus birthday and holiday contributions from grandparents. But when Sarah began showing theatrical promise, the distributions shifted. Her competitions required entry fees. Her summer programs cost thousands. Special coaching couldn't wait. Small withdrawals from my portion began when I was 10. By 14, the pattern was established, though I didn't fully understand it then. "We'll make it up later," my father would assure me when I'd noticed the statements. "Once Sarah gets established, everything will balance out." I believed him because children trust their parents, especially children who've been praised for being the reasonable one their entire lives. The summer before my senior year of high school, Sarah's big moment arrived. An acceptance letter from Westmore University's prestigious performing arts program. Only 36 students selected annually. Alumni on Broadway, in Hollywood, at major opera companies worldwide. A launching pad guaranteed to catapult her into the career she'd been groomed for since kindergarten. The celebratory dinner stretched late into the night. Extended family gathered to toast Sarah's success. My grandfather wept with pride. My uncle promised to fly in for her first major performance. I sat quietly, genuinely happy for my sister, yet acutely aware of the stark difference between this reaction and the polite acknowledgement my early college acceptance and merit scholarship had received 2 months earlier. "We are so blessed," my mother announced, raising her glass, "to have a daughter destined for greatness and a son so sensible and steady." Destined for greatness. Sensible and steady. Our roles crystallized in a single toast. The tuition reality hit 3 weeks later. Even with Sarah's partial scholarship, Westmore would cost nearly $60,000 annually. My parents' salaries as an accountant and teacher couldn't stretch to cover it. Their home equity was already tapped from previous arts-related expenses. Retirement accounts were off-limits due to penalty fees, which left my college fund, the one financial resource not yet fully depleted. I sometimes wonder if they felt any hesitation before that kitchen table conversation. If my mother's nervous, ring-twisting betrayed genuine conflict or merely discomfort at speaking financial truths aloud. If my father's business-like tone masked shame or simply pragmatic determination, what I know with certainty is this: they presented the decision as necessary rather than optional. The words, "we need," rather than "we're asking." The implicit message that refusing wasn't a choice a good son would make. The evening after I surrendered my funds, I overheard my parents talking in their bedroom as I passed in the hallway. "He took it better than I expected," my father said, voice low but audible. "Veronica understands what's important to this family," my mother replied. "He's always been mature for his age. Not mature enough to be consulted before the decision was made, apparently. Just mature enough to accept what was being taken." That night marked the first hairline fracture in my relationship with my parents. Invisible on the surface, but structural damage nonetheless. We continued our familiar patterns. I helped Sarah pack for Westmore. I revised my college plans, researching scholarships with new urgency, investigating community college transfer programs, calculating part-time work hours against credit requirements. When my adjusted acceptance letter from State University arrived, offering me a place but with insufficient financial aid, I didn't share the news at dinner. My reduced future no longer seemed worthy of family discussion. I simply pinned it to my bulletin board and started researching student loans. My grandmother Ruth was the only one who understood what had happened. My mother's mother, a retired nurse with sharp eyes and sharper insights, cornered me during a family gathering that summer. "They took your money for Sarah, didn't they?" she asked without preamble as we stood alone in the kitchen. I hesitated, unwilling to create family conflict. "It's fine, I'll manage," she snorted, stirring her iced tea with unnecessary force. "It's many things, Veronica, but fine isn't one of them. My daughter has always had a blind spot where your sister is concerned. Sarah has real talent." I offered, the defensive response automatic after years of family programming. "So do you," my grandmother countered firmly. "Different talents, equally valuable. Your parents can't see it because they've personalized this, projected their own regrets onto you children. Sarah represents the artistic path they abandoned. You represent the practical choice they resent having to make." Her assessment was startlingly clear, putting into words the dynamic I'd sensed but couldn't articulate. "What should I do?" I asked, suddenly feeling like a child despite being 18 and legally an adult. Grandmother Ruth squeezed my arm. "Play the long game, Veronica. Your sister's chosen a profession where success is statistically unlikely. Your field rewards, persistence and intelligence, both of which you have in abundance. This isn't the last chapter." She slipped me an envelope before leaving that day. Inside was a check for $5,000. Not enough to replace what I'd lost, but enough to cover my first semester's books and expenses. The note simply read, "Invest in yourself. Someone should." That $5,000 became the foundation of my altered future. Community college for 2 years, working 30 hours weekly at a medical supply company, maintaining a perfect GPA. Transfer to State University's biomedical engineering program with a half-tuition scholarship secured through relentless applications. research assistantships to cover remaining costs, graduation with honors, followed by a fully funded PhD program that recognized my potential. During those years, Sarah's Westmore experience unfolded in predictable patterns. Leading roles in university productions, glowing evaluations from professors, a showcase performance attended by industry professionals. The family orbit continued to revolve around her trajectory, with holidays dominated by updates on her latest achievements. My academic and early professional successes received obligatory acknowledgement. "That's wonderful, honey." Now, Sarah's been called back for an off-Broadway production, reinforcing the message that had been clear since childhood. Her path mattered more. Upon Sarah's graduation, my parents threw an elaborate party, inviting everyone they knew to celebrate her launch into the professional performing world. They presented her with an expensive watch engraved with "Reach for the Stars" and announced they'd help with her first month's rent in New York. When I completed my PhD 3 years later, they sent a card with a gift certificate to a department store. The contrast wasn't subtle. I don't tell this story to evoke pity or to vilify my family. The patterns established in childhood are powerful and often invisible to those perpetuating them. My parents genuinely believed they were allocating family resources according to need and potential. They saw Sarah's artistic career as fragile, requiring constant nurturing, while my scientific path seemed sturdy enough to withstand reduced support. They weren't deliberately cruel, just blinded by their own projections and the decades-long habit of prioritizing one child's dreams over another's. What they couldn't have predicted was how completely our fortunes would reverse over the next decade, or how the seeds planted during that kitchen table conversation would grow into a moment of reckoning none of us could have anticipated. The research lab at Northeastern Medical Center hummed with quiet energy as I adjusted the parameters on our latest test run. Dr. Patel's targeted drug delivery system was showing remarkable promise, a breakthrough that could transform cancer treatment by reducing side effects while improving efficacy. After 2 years of collaborative work, we were approaching a critical milestone. "The Foundation reviewers will be here Friday," Dr. Patel reminded me, peering over her glasses at the data streaming across my monitor. "Are you ready for the presentation?" "Almost," I replied, making a final adjustment to the simulation. "I've refined the delivery model based on last week's results. The precision has improved by another 8%. She nodded, satisfaction evident in her typically reserved expression. "Excellent. If the review goes well, this could mean full funding for the next phase, and your name as principal investigator on a development track." The possibility sent a jolt of excitement through me. Principal investigator at 30 would be a career-defining achievement, opening doors that typically remained closed to researchers my age. The position would come with not only academic prestige, but financial stability that had eluded me since the day my college fund vanished. "I've scheduled the conference room for tomorrow at 10, I said. "We can run through the full presentation then." My phone buzzed insistently on the lab bench. Third call from my parents in the past hour. I silenced it again, focusing on the data before me. "Family emergency?" Dr. Patel asked, her tone neutral but her eyes keenly observant. "Just my parents being persistent," I replied, making another notation on my tablet. "Nothing that can't wait until after the review prep." The truth was more complicated. Since my father's cryptic call about financial miscalculations and losing the house, I'd been deliberately maintaining distance. The timing, just days before the most important presentation of my career, felt disturbingly familiar. Once, again, a crucial moment in my professional journey was colliding with family drama. When I finally left the lab that evening, I had 7 missed calls and a text message from my mother. "Please call immediately. It's urgent. Standing in the parking garage." I took a deep breath and returned the call. "Veronica, thank God," my mother answered, her voice tight with anxiety. "We've been trying to reach you all day." "I was in the lab," I said simply. What's going on? It's worse than we thought, she began, words tumbling out in a rush. The investment advisor your father trusted, he's being investigated for fraud. Most of our retirement savings are gone. The house is underwater after we took out a second mortgage for Sarah's New York apartment down payment 3 years ago. And now your father's heart condition. I leaned against my car, processing this barrage of information. What heart condition? The stress has triggered his arrhythmia again. The doctor wants him on a new medication regimen, but our insurance won't cover it. We're looking at $2,800 a month out of pocket. The amount hung in the air between us, not an accidental figure, specific enough to be a request without directly asking. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. Have you looked into patient assistance programs for the medication? A pause. We've explored everything, Veronica. We're at the end of our resources. What about Sarah? I asked, the question inevitable. My mother's hesitation spoke volumes. Sarah's between projects right now. Her last show closed early, and the new one has been postponed. She's not in a position to help financially. Of course she wasn't. Despite a decade of investment in her career, my college fund, their second mortgage, countless other contributions, Sarah remained perpetually on the verge of success without achieving financial stability. I need some time to think, I said finally. I have a major research presentation on Friday that could determine my entire career trajectory. Can we talk about this over the weekend? Another pause. The bank has given us until the end of the month to catch up on the mortgage payments. After that, the implicit pressure was familiar. Create urgency, emphasize dire consequences, expect the responsible child to step in. The same dynamic that had cost me my educational future was now reaching for my hard-won present. I'll call you Sunday, I said firmly, ending the conversation before guilt could erode my boundary. As I drove home, memories from my undergraduate years surfaced unbidden. Working the night shift at the medical supply warehouse while taking a full course load, subsisting on ramen and peanut butter to afford textbooks, watching classmates with parental support participate in unpaid research opportunities I couldn't access without income. Meanwhile, Sarah had lived in a Westmore dormitory with a meal plan covered by my former college fund, pursuing her passion, without financial burden. Alex was waiting at my apartment when I arrived, takeout containers and research journals spread across my small dining table. One look at my expression, and she set aside her legal brief. Parents? She asked knowingly. I nodded, dropping onto the sofa. Financial crisis, house in foreclosure, Dad's heart condition requiring expensive medication. The complete disaster trifecta. Alex listened attentively as I outlined the situation, her legal mind dissecting the problems into manageable components. Let me understand, she said when I finished. They took $40,000 from your college fund for Sarah's education, later mortgaged their house partly to help with her apartment in New York, invested their retirement with someone who turned out to be fraudulent, and now they're implicitly asking you to help with mortgage payments and medical bills? Put so succinctly, the pattern sounded even more troubling. That covers it, I confirmed. And the timing, just before your foundation presentation, is coincidental? I ran a hand through my hair. I'd like to think so, but history suggests otherwise. Family crises have a way of materializing precisely when I'm approaching a significant achievement. Alex's expression remained carefully neutral. After nearly 2 years together, she understood my complicated family dynamics but was cautious about influencing my decisions regarding them. What are you thinking? She asked instead. I'm thinking about what my grandmother Ruth told me years ago, I replied, staring at the ceiling. Play the long game. She was right. I've built something valuable through persistence despite the obstacles. This research could help thousands of cancer patients if we secure full funding. And you deserve that opportunity, Alex said firmly. What happened when you asked about Sarah's contribution? I laughed without humor. Apparently, she's between projects and not in a position to help financially. 10 years after consuming my educational fund for her degree, she's still waiting for her big break. While you've created your own opportunities despite starting with a disadvantage, Alex observed. There's irony there. There was indeed. The practical path they'd relegated me to had produced steady growth, while the special artistic career they'd sacrificed so much to nurture remained perpetually precarious. They expect me to step in, I said, the realization settling heavily. Just like before, they see me as the reliable solution to problems they created. What do you want to do? Alex asked, the question cutting to the heart of my dilemma. I didn't answer immediately. The situation required careful consideration rather than reactive response. First, I need to focus on Friday's presentation, I said finally. This research is too important to jeopardize. After that, I'll assess exactly what's happening with their finances and what reasonable options exist. Alex nodded. A measured approach. Do you want me to review their mortgage documents when you get them? I might see alternatives they've missed. Her offer represented exactly what had been missing from my family dynamics. Support without sacrifice, help that empowered rather than diminished. I'd appreciate that, I said, feeling some tension release. And I should reach out to Sarah, directly. I want to hear her perspective without our parents filtering the information. Later that night, after Alex had gone home and I'd reviewed my presentation materials once more, I sent a text to my sister. Need to talk about Mom and Dad's situation. Coffee tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Can't tomorrow. Audition. Call you after? Even now, her priorities remain unchanged. An audition took precedence over a family financial crisis. I couldn't help wondering if she even knew the severity of our parents' situation, or if they'd sheltered her from that reality as they'd always done. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line stopped. Me cold. Urgent. Review of medication expenses. David Williams. The email, forwarded from my father's account, contained detailed information about his cardiac medication costs, insurance denial documentation, and a physician's statement regarding the necessity of treatment. No personal message accompanied. These attachments, just raw data clearly intended to underscore the urgency of their need. The calculated nature of this approach left me both troubled and sad. Rather than an open conversation about their circumstances and a request for advice or assistance, they had chosen emotional leverage, my father's health as the pressure point. I closed the email without responding, a small act of self-protection. That would have been impossible for the 18-year-old who surrendered his college fund without protest. The intervening decade had taught me difficult but necessary lessons about boundaries and manipulation, about the difference between supporting family and enabling harmful patterns. Tomorrow would bring my sister's perspective. Friday, the research, presentation, and eventually a decision about how to respond to my parents' crisis. But tonight, I needed rest and clarity, protected space to prepare for the professional opportunity I'd earned through years of determined effort. Whatever I ultimately decided regarding my parents' financial emergency, it would be a choice made, from strength and deliberation, not from the guilty obligation that had shaped so many previous family interactions. The coffee shop near the medical center provided neutral territory for difficult conversations. I'd chosen it deliberately for my meeting with Sarah, public enough to discourage drama, private enough for honest discussion. Despite agreeing to call after her audition, Sarah had texted suggesting coffee instead, which surprised me. My sister rarely prioritized family matters over career opportunities. I arrived early, securing a corner table and ordering herbal tea to soothe my pre-presentation nerves. Tomorrow's foundation review loomed large in my thoughts, the culmination of 2 years' research riding on a 60-minute presentation. Yet here I was, diverting crucial mental energy to family financial dynamics. Sarah arrived 20 minutes late, her entrance drawing attention even in a crowded cafe. At 31, she remained striking, our mother's dramatic features and our father's height combining to create an imposing presence. Her Westmore education had refined her natural confidence into polished charisma. "Veronica," she said, embracing me with theatrical affection before settling into the chair opposite. "Sorry I'm late. The director wanted to discuss character motivation after the audition." "No problem," I replied, though we both knew this wasn't true. Time management had never been Sarah's strength, a trait our parents had excused as artistic temperament throughout her childhood. After ordering a complicated coffee concoction, Sarah leaned forward. "So, Mom and Dad's financial disaster. How bad is it, really?" The question surprised me. "They haven't told you the details?" She shrugged, adjusting her scarf. "Mom mentioned investment troubles and Dad's heart thing, but you know how they are, trying to protect me from worry." The contrast with their approach to me was stark. While Sarah received filtered information to shield her from concern, I'd been sent medical documentation and specific dollar amounts, the implicit message being that their problems were now my responsibility to solve. "It's bad," I said simply. "Dad trusted the wrong financial advisor, who's now under investigation for fraud. Their retirement savings are essentially gone. The house is underwater from a second mortgage." I paused, watching her reaction. "The mortgage they took out partly to help with your Manhattan apartment down payment." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "They insisted on helping with that. I told them it wasn't necessary." "And yet you accepted," I observed, keeping my tone neutral despite the echo of past patterns. Sarah shifted slightly. "You know how they are, especially with Dad. Once he decides to help his little girl, there's no talking him out of it." She sipped her coffee, avoiding my eyes. "Besides, they were so proud that I'd landed that role in the Hamilton workshop. They wanted to be part of my big break." "The workshop that ended after 6 weeks," I said, recalling the family emails from that period. Initial excitement followed by vague explanations about creative differences and new directions. "The key director was impossible," Sarah replied defensively. "Everyone agreed he was sabotaging the project. It wasn't just me." This was familiar territory. Sarah's career setbacks consistently attributed to external factors rather than personal choices or limitations. The same narrative our parents had reinforced throughout our childhood. Sarah's talents were extraordinary. Any failures resulted from others' shortcomings or simple bad luck. "That's not why I wanted to talk," I said, redirecting the conversation. "Dad's heart condition requires medication that costs nearly $3,000 monthly. Insurance won't cover it. They can't make their mortgage payments. They're asking for my help." Sarah's expression shifted to genuine concern. "Dad's heart is that serious?" I nodded. "Apparently the stress triggered his arrhythmia again. The doctor wants him on a specific medication regimen." $3,000 a month, she repeated, eyes widening. "That's significant. On top of mortgage payments they're already behind on," I added. "They're facing foreclosure by the end of the month if they can't catch up." Sarah was silent for a moment, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I wish I could help," she finally said. "But I'm barely covering my own rent right now. The off-Broadway production I was counting on got postponed again, and the teaching gigs at the performance workshop barely cover expenses." 10 years after Westmore, after consuming my college fund and benefiting from our parents' second mortgage, Sarah remained financially precarious, exactly as my grandmother Ruth had predicted. "What?" "About Daniel?" I asked, referring to her boyfriend of 3 years. "A sound engineer for Broadway productions. Could he help temporarily?" She looked away. "We broke up last month. He took a touring position with Hamilton." "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely meaning it despite the complicated feelings surrounding this conversation. "I know you were serious. About him." "It's fine," she replied with practiced nonchalance. "The timing was wrong. Story of my career, Always almost there, always just missing the big opportunity. The hint of vulnerability was unusual for Sarah, whose public persona remained consistently confident, regardless of circumstances. For a moment, I glimpsed something beneath that carefully maintained facade. Fatigue, perhaps, or the wearing weight of perpetually deferred success. "Look," I said carefully, "I have a major research presentation tomorrow that could determine my entire career trajectory. I've told Mom and Dad we'll discuss their situation this weekend. I wanted to talk to you first, to get your perspective on what's happening and how we should handle it." Sarah looked genuinely surprised. "My perspective? You've never asked for that before." "We're both adults now," I said. "Whatever happens with Mom and Dad affects both of us." She nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need more information before making decisions. Their pattern has always been to present crises as emergencies requiring immediate action, usually financial action from others. I want to understand exactly what's happening with their mortgage, what legal options they have regarding the investment fraud, and what alternatives exist for Dad's medication." "That makes sense," Sarah agreed. "Very methodical, very Veronica." The observation came without her usual hint of condescension. "I could fly out next week to help sort through their paperwork. I'm between projects right now anyway." Her offer surprised me. Sarah rarely volunteered for family responsibilities that didn't center around her accomplishments. "That would be helpful," I acknowledged. "Alex has offered to review their mortgage, documents too. Her firm handles some foreclosure litigation, so she might spot options they've missed." "Alex?" Sarah repeated, smiling slightly. "The patent attorney. Mom mentioned you were getting serious." The description was typical of our mother's selective information sharing. "Alex is an intellectual property attorney specializing in biomedical patents. And yes, we're serious." "Good for you," Sarah said, and seemed to mean it. "At least one of us should have a functional relationship." The comment was unusually self-aware for my sister, whose romantic history had followed the same pattern as her career, promising beginnings that somehow never solidified into lasting commitments. As our conversation continued, I realized something unexpected was happening. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, Sarah and I were discussing family matters as equals rather than as the roles assigned to us since childhood: the special, artistic daughter and the practical, reliable son. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as we prepared to leave. "Do you ever regret it, giving up so much of your college fund for my Westmore education?" The directness of the question startled me. We had never openly acknowledged what had happened 10 years ago. It had become one of those family truths everyone knew but no one discussed. "It wasn't really a choice," I said after a moment. "You remember how it was presented to me?" She nodded, unexpectedly somber. "I do remember. I was in the next room when they rehearsed how to approach you. Dad wanted to emphasize the family responsibility angle. Mom thought focusing on my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity would be more persuasive. This confirmation of their calculated approach wasn't surprising, but hearing it stated so plainly reopened old wounds I'd thought long healed. "They never asked if I was okay with it," Sarah continued, surprising me further. "They just told me they'd handled the financial situation and that Westmore was happening. I was so excited about the acceptance that I didn't question where the money was coming from until weeks later." "Would it have mattered if you had known?" I asked, genuinely curious. She met my eyes directly. "I want to say yes, that I would have refused to take your future. But honestly, at 21, desperate for my big break, I probably would have rationalized it just like they did, that your path was more flexible and my opportunity was time-sensitive." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not proud of that, but it's probably true." Her honesty was unexpected and oddly healing. Not because it changed what had happened, but because it acknowledged the reality rather than maintaining the family fiction that everything had worked out for the best. For what it's worth, she added as we walked to the parking lot, I recognize the irony. You've built something substantial and meaningful from what was left, while I'm still chasing the dream that supposedly justified taking your opportunities. I didn't know how to respond to this unprecedented moment of self-awareness from my sister. Before I could formulate a reply, Sarah surprised me with a quick, genuine hug. Knock them dead at your presentation tomorrow, she said. And let me know when you want to tag team Mom and Dad this weekend. As I watched her walk away, I realized our relationship had shifted subtly but significantly. Not a complete transformation, but a crack in the rigid roles we'd occupied for decades, enough to allow something new to potentially emerge. Whether this change would extend to our interactions with our parents remained to be seen. The weekends. Discussions would reveal if new patterns could replace the dysfunctional dynamics established so long ago. The Foundation Review Panel consisted of 5 individuals, 3 scientific researchers from prestigious institutions, a pharmaceutical company executive, and a philanthropist whose family had been affected by cancer. They sat in a semicircle at the conference room table, expressions attentive but neutral as I concluded my presentation. In summary, our targeted delivery system has demonstrated 78% greater precision in reaching cancer cells while reducing collateral damage to healthy tissue by 62% compared to current treatment protocols. With full funding for the next phase, we believe we can improve these metrics further and begin preparing for clinical trials within 18 months. I clicked to the final slide. A simulated visualization showing our nanoparticles delivering medication precisely to tumor sites while bypassing healthy cells. The image represented 2 years of meticulous research, countless late nights, and the career opportunity I'd been working toward since the day my original educational path was derailed. Thank you for your attention, I said, meeting each reviewer's gaze briefly. Dr. Patel and I welcome your questions. For the next 40 minutes, we fielded increasingly specific inquiries about our methodology, anticipated challenges, and scalability projections. The questioning was thorough, but engaged, a positive sign. Dr. Patel handled the more theoretical aspects with her characteristic precision, while I addressed the practical applications and potential healthcare impact. One final question, Dr. Williams, said Dr. Eleanor Rivas, the most senior researcher on the panel. If awarded full funding as principal investigator, what specific milestones would you establish for the first 6 months of the project? The question was significant. Addressing me as the principal investigator suggested they were seriously considering approving the leadership role I'd proposed. I outlined my planned approach, emphasizing accountability measures and research. Validation points. When the review concluded, Dr. Patel and I were asked to wait in her office while the panel deliberated. As soon as the door closed behind us, she turned to me with an approving nod. Excellent presentation, she said, uncharacteristic emotion coloring her typically reserved demeanor. Dr. Rivas's final question was particularly telling. They're considering you for PI. It went well, I agreed cautiously. But we should prepare for all possibilities. My phone vibrated in my pocket, my father calling again. I silenced it without checking the screen. Family situation still pressing? Dr. Patel asked, noticing the gesture. Unfortunately, my parents are facing foreclosure and significant medical expenses. The timing is challenging, she finished when I trailed off. Life rarely schedules crises conveniently. I appreciated her understated acknowledgement. Dr. Patel knew fragments of my family history, enough to understand the present tension without requiring elaboration. Whatever the panel decides, she said, changing the subject, your work on this project has been exemplary. I've written recommendation letters for 3 researchers who were subsequently awarded independent funding. Yours was the strongest application I've endorsed. The The praise from my typically reserved mentor meant more than she likely realized. Throughout my academic and professional journey, external validation had been scarce, my achievements acknowledged, but rarely celebrated by those whose approval mattered most. 40 minutes later, the department administrator summoned us back to the conference room. The panel's spokesperson, Dr. Rivas, stood as we entered. Dr. Patel, Dr. Williams, we've reached. Our decision, she began formally. The Foundation is prepared to fully fund the next phase of your research with an initial grant of $2.4 million over 3 years. I maintained my professional composure while processing the staggering figure, nearly 10 times our current funding level. Furthermore, Dr. Rivas continued, we support the proposal for Dr. Williams to serve as principal investigator, with Dr. Patel transitioning to senior advisor. The Foundation believes this research shows extraordinary promise for improving cancer treatment outcomes. After signing preliminary acceptance documents and discussing next steps, we were finally alone in the corridor outside the conference room. Dr. Patel allowed herself a rare smile. Principal Investigator Williams, she said, satisfaction evident in her tone. I believe this calls for celebration. Dinner tonight? My treat. I'd be honored, I replied, still processing the enormity of what had just occurred. Though I should warn you, I'll be distracted by company. My family situation requires attention this weekend. Monday, then, she suggested. After you've navigated your personal matters. As we parted ways, my professional triumph collided with the family crisis awaiting my attention. The juxtaposition was jarring, achieving my greatest career advancement while simultaneously facing my parents' greatest financial setback. In my office, I finally reviewed the missed calls and messages that had accumulated during the presentation. 3 calls from my father, 2 from my mother, and a text from Sarah. Mom called crying, says the bank is accelerating the foreclosure timeline. Call me when you can. I closed my eyes, taking a moment to center myself before dialing my sister's number. How did the presentation go? Sarah asked immediately upon answering. Her question, prioritizing my professional moment before family drama, was so unexpected that I momentarily fumbled for words. It went well, I said finally. They're funding the next phase. I've been named principal investigator. Veronica, that's huge. Sarah's enthusiasm seemed genuine. Principal investigator at 30. Even I know that's exceptional. Thank you, I said, surprised by how much her acknowledgement meant. Now tell me what's happening with Mom and Dad. Sarah's sigh was audible. Mom called this morning in full crisis mode. Apparently, they received formal notice that the foreclosure process is moving faster than they expected. She was practically hysterical. Did she provide specifics? Timeline? Options? Nothing concrete. Just panic and... Sarah hesitated. And what? Guilt, she finished reluctantly. Lots of comments about how they've always supported my dreams, and how family should help family in times of need. The familiar refrain made my stomach tighten. They're still operating from the same playbook? Seems that way, Sarah agreed. Though Mom did say something interesting. When I asked why they weren't calling me about this since I'm the unemployed one with the flexible schedule, she said, Veronica has always been better with practical matters. Practical matters, I repeated, the coded language unmistakable. Like my practical education that didn't require their financial support. And my practical career now makes me a practical solution to their financial problems. Exactly, Sarah said, surprising me again with her perception. It's like they've typecast us since childhood and can't see beyond those roles. The insight, coming from Sarah of all people, was unexpectedly profound. Our parents had indeed locked us into characters in a family narrative that no longer reflected reality. Sarah, the talented artist requiring constant support. Me, the reliable problem solver, requiring minimal nurturing. I've been thinking about what you said, Sarah continued when I didn't immediately respond. About wanting more information before making decisions. I checked flights, and can be there Tuesday morning if that works. We could review their situation together. Her offer to participate rather than leaving the entire burden on me represented a significant departure from established patterns. Whether it signified genuine growth or simply responded to the severity of our parents' crisis remained to be seen. Tuesday works, I confirmed. I'll let them know we'll address this together when you arrive. After ending the call, I sat in my office contemplating the critical decision point before me. My career had just achieved a breakthrough moment. The kind of opportunity that comes rarely and must be seized with full focus. Simultaneously, my parents faced a genuine crisis that, despite the manipulative overtones of their approach, required timely intervention. The 18-year-old who surrendered his college fund would have automatically sacrificed his own priorities for family needs. The 30-year-old principal investigator had different obligations to my research team, to cancer patients who might benefit from our work, and to my own hard-won professional achievement. As I drove home, the parallels between past and present were impossible to ignore. Once again, the family crisis threatened to overshadow personal accomplishment. Once again, I was positioned as the solution to problems I hadn't created. The difference was that now I had alternatives, resources, and most importantly, perspective, that my younger self had lacked. Alex was waiting at my apartment, a bottle of champagne chilling in anticipation of my presentation results. Her face lit up when I entered. "Well?" she asked, her expression hopeful. "Full funding approved," I confirmed, allowing myself to smile fully for the first time since the review. 3 years, $2.4 million, and I've been named principal investigator. Her celebration was unreserved, genuine joy untainted by the complications of family history. For the next hour, we focused solely on this professional milestone, deliberately setting aside the pending family crisis for a brief, precious interval. Later, as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, Alex broached the subject we'd temporarily shelved. "Have you decided how to handle your parents' situation?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. I gazed at the deepening colors on the horizon. "I'm still gathering information. Sarah's flying in Tuesday to help assess exactly what's happening." Alex's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sarah is getting involved? That's unexpected." Apparently, having her dreams funded didn't permanently exempt her from family responsibility, I observed. Though I'll believe it when I see her actually engaging with practical solutions. "Fair," Alex acknowledged. "What are you considering in terms of assistance?" The question cut to the heart of my dilemma. I have options now that I didn't have at 18. I could cover Dad's medication costs temporarily while they explore patient assistance programs. I could help them negotiate with the bank regarding the foreclosure. I could connect them with legal resources about the investment fraud. All reasonable approaches, Alex noted. "And financial assistance?" "That's the complicated part," I admitted. "I have some savings, and the PI position comes with a significant salary increase, but direct financial bailout recreates the pattern from 10 years ago," Alex finished, understanding the core issue, "and potentially enables continued financial mismanagement." Her legal mind had cut through to the essential question: was helping my parents financially an act of compassion or complicity in dysfunctional patterns? "I need to understand what happened with their investments," I said finally. "Whether this was genuine fraud or poor decision-making. And I need clarity about their mortgage situation, how much they borrowed for Sarah's apartment down payment versus other expenses." "Information before action," Alex agreed. "A wise approach." As darkness settled around us, I contemplated the decision before me. Unlike the 18-year-old who had surrendered his college fund with a single, "okay," I now possessed the resources to make a considered choice. Financial resources, certainly, but more importantly, emotional and psychological resources developed through years of creating success despite obstacles. Whatever I decided regarding my parents' crisis, it would emerge from strength and clarity rather than obligation and guilt. The path forward wasn't yet clear, but my capacity to navigate it wisely had grown immeasurably in the decade since that kitchen table conversation had altered the trajectory of my life. One step at a time, I said aloud, as much to myself as to Alex. First, accurate information, then thoughtful decisions, on my terms, not theirs. The contrast with my younger self's immediate capitulation wasn't lost on me. Perhaps that was the most significant growth of all, the ability to face family pressure with boundaries intact, compassion balanced with clarity, and personal well-being no longer automatically sacrificed on the altar of others' needs. The weekend passed in a delicate balance of professional excitement and personal tension. I received congratulatory emails from colleagues as news of the foundation grant spread through the department. Dr. Patel forwarded preliminary paperwork for the principal investigator position, with a formal contract to follow. Meanwhile, my parents continued their campaign of increasingly desperate messages about their financial situation. By Sunday evening, I could no longer reasonably delay engaging with them. After discussing strategies with Alex, I initiated a video call rather than responding to their numerous voicemails. This small act of controlling the communication method was itself a boundary. Addressing the situation on my terms rather than being pulled into their escalating crisis narrative. My mother answered immediately, relief washing over her face. "Veronica, finally, we've been so worried." My father appeared beside her a moment later, looking noticeably thinner than when I'd last seen him 6 months earlier. The strain of their financial situation had clearly taken a physical toll. "I apologize for the delayed response," I began, maintaining calm professionalism. "I had a major research presentation that required my full attention." "Of course, honey," my mother said quickly. "How did that go?" The question seemed perfunctory, a brief social nicety before returning to their pressing concerns. I decided to make them acknowledge this milestone properly. "The foundation approved full funding for our research," I said. "I've been named principal investigator on a $2.4 million grant over 3 years. Their reaction was telling. Momentary surprise followed by a quick recalibration as they processed what this might mean for their situation. "That's wonderful news," my father said, genuine pride briefly eclipsing his anxiety. "Principal investigator. That's significant, right?" "It's a career-defining opportunity," I confirmed, "especially at my age." "We always knew you'd do well," my mother added, her smile tight at the edges. "You've always been so capable." There it was again, the familiar framing that had defined our family dynamics. My capability as both compliment and expectation. The unspoken subtext, "You've always been able to handle things on your own, so you should be able to handle our problems too." "Sarah mentioned you received foreclosure acceleration notices," I said, redirecting the conversation. "I'd like to understand exactly what's happening with your finances before we discuss potential solutions." My parents exchanged glances, seemingly thrown by my methodical approach. They had expected either immediate assistance or outright refusal, not this measured request for information. "It's complicated," my father began, rubbing his forehead. "The investment situation—" "I understand it's complex," I interrupted gently, "which is why Sarah and I have decided to approach this together. She's flying in on Tuesday, and we'd like to review all your financial documentation then. Mortgage papers, investment records, medical bills, everything relevant to your current situation." "Sarah's coming?" My mother seemed genuinely surprised. "She didn't mention that when we spoke." "We decided yesterday," I explained. "This affects both of us, and we want to help you find sustainable solutions." Another exchange of glances between my parents. They had always approached us separately, maintaining different expectations and narratives for each child. Our unified front represented a new dynamic they hadn't anticipated. "That's thoughtful," my father said carefully. But the situation is urgent. The bank— I understand the urgency, I assured him. Which is why I've already taken some preliminary actions. I've researched patient assistance programs for your heart medication and found 3 you likely qualify for. I've emailed you the applications. My mother blinked in surprise. Oh, that's very helpful. Additionally, I continued, Alex has connections at a law firm specializing in investment fraud cases. They're willing to review your situation once. We have the complete documentation. Your girlfriend is getting involved? My father's tone carried a hint of discomfort at having family financial troubles exposed to an outsider. Alex is an attorney with relevant expertise, I replied neutrally. Her professional perspective will be valuable in understanding your legal options. This methodical, resource-oriented approach was clearly not what they had expected. Their usual crisis management strategy involved emotional appeals, followed by family members providing immediate financial intervention. My insistence on information gathering and exploring non-monetary solutions first represented a significant departure from established patterns. While we're waiting for Sarah's arrival, I said, it would be helpful if you could gather all relevant financial documents and send copies of your mortgage agreement and any foreclosure notices. The more information we have before Tuesday, the more productive our discussion will be. We can do that, my mother agreed, shooting my father a warning glance when he seemed about to protest. And how are you doing with all of this, Veronica? With your big career news and our situation happening simultaneously? The question seemed genuine, perhaps the first acknowledgement that their crisis might be impacting my life at a significant professional moment. I'm managing, I said simply, compartmentalizing when necessary. You've always been good at that, my father observed, his tone hovering between admiration and something more complex. Even as a kid, Sarah would have every emotion written, all over her face, but you could lock things away when needed. I wasn't sure if his observation was meant as praise or criticism. Perhaps both. It's a useful skill in research, I replied, maintaining perspective during setbacks. The conversation concluded with practical arrangements for Sarah's arrival and agreement that they would compile their financial documentation. As I ended the call, I felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. For the first time in our relationship, I had engaged with my parents on my terms rather than automatically responding to their expectations. Monday brought a welcome immersion in professional matters. The research team gathered for an initial briefing on the expanded funding, their excitement palpable as I outlined the opportunities the grant would provide. Dr. Patel watched from the back of the room. Her typically reserved expression softened with pride as I fielded questions about the project's next phase. You've grown into this role seamlessly, she commented as we walked back to our offices afterward. The team respects your leadership. They respect the work, I demurred. The research speaks for itself. The research is exceptional, she agreed, but don't underestimate the impact of your management style. You provide clear direction while encouraging innovation, a balance many scientists never master. Her observation caught me off guard. Throughout my academic and professional career, I had attributed any success to the quality of my work rather than personal leadership qualities. The possibility that my interpersonal approach might be equally valuable was something I'd rarely considered. I had excellent mentorship, I said, acknowledging her influence on my development. You did, she agreed with a small smile. But you've developed your own approach. The Foundation reviewers noted it specifically in their comments. Your ability to communicate complex concepts clearly and your collaborative methodology. Later that afternoon, I received an email from my father containing scanned copies of their mortgage documents, foreclosure notices, and medical bills. The information was more comprehensive than I had expected, indicating they were taking our planned intervention seriously. I forwarded the mortgage documents to Alex, who promised to review them that evening. First impression, the terms of their refinancing were predatory, she noted in her response. There may be grounds for challenging the accelerated foreclosure based on lending violations. This preliminary assessment offered the first glimmer of potential solutions. If their mortgage terms could be legally challenged, it might create breathing room to address their broader financial issues. As I prepared for Sarah's arrival the next day, I realized how profoundly the dynamics had shifted from 10 years earlier. The 18-year-old who surrendered his college fund had possessed neither the knowledge nor the confidence to question his parents' financial decisions. The 30-year-old principal investigator approached the situation with professional resources, legal counsel, and the ability to analyze problems methodically rather than emotionally. My phone chimed with a text from Sarah. Flight arriving 10:35 a.m. Dad sent financial docs. Holy crap. Did you see the interest rate on that second mortgage? Just forwarded to Alex, I replied. She says it may be legally problematic. In a good way? Like, can they challenge it? Potentially. We'll discuss it tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Looking forward to it. Team Williams siblings taking action. The phrase Team Williams siblings struck me as both novel and oddly fitting. Despite our different paths and the historical imbalance in family support, Sarah and I were now approaching our parents' crisis as equal partners, each bringing different perspectives and strengths to the situation. Tuesday morning, I left the lab early to collect Sarah from the airport. She emerged from the terminal looking less theatrical than usual, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, dressed in jeans and a sweater rather than her typical artistic ensemble. No auditions this week? I asked as we walked to my car. She gave me a wry smile. Believe it or not, I'm capable of dressing for practicality when the situation warrants. We're analyzing financial documents, not performing Shakespeare. Her self-awareness was another unexpected development. The Sarah I'd grown up with had maintained her performer persona regardless of circumstances, approaching even family gatherings as if they were potential auditions. I reviewed Dad's medical information last night, I said as we drove toward my apartment. There are viable patient assistance programs that could reduce his medication costs by about 70%. Sarah nodded. That's significant. What? About the mortgage situation? Alex thinks there may be grounds for challenging the foreclosure based on predatory lending practices. She's bringing the documentation to a colleague who specializes in that area. Your girlfriend is really stepping up here, Sarah observed. That's not something I've experienced in relationships. Daniel always kept clear boundaries between his life and my family situations. The comment revealed more about her previous relationship than she perhaps intended. I wondered how many times our parents had created financial emergencies that affected Sarah's personal life, and how those dynamics had shaped her romantic relationships. Alex understands complex family systems, I explained. Her brother has addiction issues that created similar patterns in their family. She recognizes the difference between supporting and enabling. We spent the drive discussing strategy for meeting with our parents later that day. By the time we reached my apartment, we had outlined a clear approach: assess the full financial picture, identify legal remedies for the mortgage situation, establish a plan for medical expenses, and, most importantly, address the underlying patterns that had created the crisis. This feels different, Sarah said as we reviewed our notes at my kitchen table. Usually when Dad calls with a financial emergency, I just feel overwhelmed and inadequate. Having an actual plan makes it seem manageable. Information creates options, I replied. And we have more resources now than when we were younger. Sarah looked up from the documents, her expression suddenly serious. I've been thinking about what you said at coffee the other day, about not really having a choice when they took your college fund. I want you to know I understand better now what that meant, how it shaped your entire future. Her acknowledgement, 10 years delayed but seemingly genuine, created a strange tightness in my chest. We can't change the past, I said finally. But we can approach the present differently. Team Williams' siblings, she agreed, holding up her coffee mug in a mock toast. Taking action on our terms, not theirs. As we prepared to meet our parents, I felt a cautious optimism beneath my practical focus, not just about resolving their immediate financial crisis, but about the possibility of establishing healthier family dynamics moving forward, dynamics based on mutual respect rather than assigned roles, on collaboration rather than capitulation. The path ahead remained challenging, but for the first time, I believed we were approaching it with the right tools and perspectives to create lasting change. My parents' Arizona home, purchased during the real estate boom 5 years earlier, sat in a planned community of identical stucco houses with terracotta roofs. The property had seemed like a sensible retirement investment when they relocated from the Midwest, but now represented the center of their financial crisis. Sarah and I arrived precisely at the agreed time, a small but deliberate statement about boundaries and expectations. In the past, family gatherings had operated on what we'd privately termed parent time, an elastic concept where our schedules were expected to accommodate their delays and changed plans without complaint. Mom opened the door before we could ring the bell, her expression a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. She'd clearly made an effort with her appearance, hair freshly styled, makeup carefully applied, as if preparing for a formal meeting rather than a family discussion. "You're here," she said, embracing Sarah first, then me. "Your father's in the living room. He's been anxious all morning." The house showed subtle signs of financial strain. Magazines rather than fresh flowers on the coffee table, an empty space where an artwork had once hung, thermostats set higher than my mother, typically preferred in Arizona's heat, small economies that spoke volumes about their changed circumstances. Dad rose when we entered, looking older than his 65 years. The confidence that had once been his defining characteristic, the unwavering certainty that had allowed him to redirect my college fund without apparent qualm, had diminished noticeably. In its place was something I'd rarely seen from him: uncertainty. "Sarah. Veronica." He embraced us both, holding on perhaps a moment longer than usual. "Thank you for coming." "Let's sit down," I suggested, taking control of the interaction from the beginning. "We have a lot to discuss." We arranged ourselves around the dining table, which Mom had set with coffee and untouched pastries. Sarah and I sat on one side, our parents on the other, a physical representation of the shifted dynamics. "We've reviewed the documentation you sent," I began, opening my laptop. "And we have some questions before discussing potential solutions." My parents nodded, clearly uncomfortable with this structured approach, but accepting it as the price of our assistance. "First, the investment situation," I continued, referencing my notes. "Dad, you mentioned your financial advisor is under investigation for fraud. What exactly happened there?" My father shifted in his seat. "Lawrence had been managing our portfolio for years, since before retirement. He suggested moving our assets into what he called exclusive investment vehicles with higher returns to support our retirement lifestyle." "These weren't standard market investments," I clarified. "They were private placements? Private equity opportunities," he called them, in real estate development and technology startups." Dad's expression turned pained. "We transferred nearly 70% of our retirement savings to these investments over the past 3 years. Without diversification or liquidity provisions," I noted, the financial recklessness evident. "He assured us they were safe," Mom interjected. "He showed us projected returns of 12 to 15% annually." Sarah leaned forward. "Did you research these investments independently? Or consult another financial advisor?" The question was incisive, highlighting the pattern of making significant financial decisions based on single sources of information. The same pattern that had led to my college fund being redirected years earlier. Lawrence had always steered us well before, Dad replied defensively. We trusted his expertise. I exchanged glances with Sarah, the parallel unmistakable. They had trusted their own judgment about redistributing my educational funds without seeking outside perspectives or considering long-term consequences. When did you realize something was wrong? I asked. 6 months ago, Mom answered. The quarterly statements stopped coming. When your father called Lawrence's office, the receptionist said he was unavailable. After several more attempts, we received a letter from the regulatory authorities informing us of the investigation. And the mortgage situation, Sarah prompted. The documents show you refinanced 3 years ago, taking out significant equity. What was that for? The direct question created visible discomfort. Mom glanced at Dad, clearly hoping he would handle this part of the explanation. Multiple purposes, he said vaguely. Home improvements, investment opportunities Lawrence recommended, helping you with your New York apartment down payment. What percentage went to each? I asked, maintaining the factual focus despite the emotional undercurrents. More discomfort. We didn't track it quite that specifically, Dad admitted. Approximately, Sarah pressed, surprising me with her persistence. Dad sighed. About $40,000 for home improvements, $50,000 for Lawrence's special investment opportunity, $35,000 toward your apartment down payment. And the interest rate on this refinancing was 7.8%, I noted, referencing Alex's analysis. Well above market rates at that time. Did you shop around or compare lenders? Lawrence recommended this mortgage company, Mom said quietly. He said they could process the application quickly without extensive documentation. The pattern became increasingly clear. Repeated financial decisions made with minimal due diligence, often based on a single trusted source, with insufficient consideration of alternatives or long-term consequences. Now, regarding Dad's heart medication, I continued, shifting topics. The documents show insurance denied coverage because there are generic alternatives available. Did your doctor specifically indicate you need the brand name version? Dad looked surprised by the question. He prescribed it, so I assumed it was necessary. Did you ask about generics or alternative treatments? Sarah inquired. Well, no, Dad admitted. Dr. Hancock has been my cardiologist for years. I trust his judgment. Trust without verification. The recurring theme of their financial collapse was emerging with painful clarity. After nearly an hour of similar questioning, methodical, factual, occasionally uncomfortable, we had assembled a comprehensive picture of their situation. Failed. Investments based on blind trust. Predatory mortgage terms accepted without scrutiny. Medical expenses incurred without exploring alternatives. Credit card debt accumulated to maintain appearances even as their financial foundation crumbled. The pattern was so consistent it was almost textbook, a cascade of poor decisions justified by trust in authority figures and a desire to maintain lifestyle expectations regardless of changing circumstances. All right, I said finally, closing my notebook. Based on everything you've shared, Sarah and I have identified several potential approaches. Our parents straightened, relief evident in their expressions. They had endured our questioning and now expected the rescue they had been counting on all along. Before we outline those options, Sarah interjected, following our agreed strategy, we need to address the underlying patterns that created this situation. The relief on our parents' faces faltered. What do you mean, patterns? Mom asked cautiously. Sarah and I exchanged glances. This was the moment we had prepared for, the necessary confrontation before any meaningful resolution could occur. Mom, Dad, I began carefully. The documentation and your own explanations reveal consistent patterns in how you've approached financial decisions. Trusting single sources of information without verification. Making significant commitments without exploring alternatives. Using future assets to fund current lifestyle choices. These are the same patterns that led you to take Veronica's college fund for my education, Sarah added, her directness surprising our parents. Decisions made with absolute certainty that turned out to be deeply flawed. Mom's expression hardened slightly. That was different. That was a family decision about priorities. Was it? I asked quietly. A family decision would have involved genuine input from all family members. What happened was you and Dad deciding unilaterally to redistribute resources you had promised. To me. We did what we thought was best, Dad protested. Sarah's opportunity was important, I acknowledged. But so was mine. The point isn't to relitigate the past, but to recognize that the same decision-making approach that led to taking my college fund has now resulted in your current financial crisis. A heavy silence settled over the table. My parents had clearly not expected this level of analysis or the direct connection between past actions and present circumstances. We're here to help, Sarah assured them, softening her tone slightly. But that help needs to include addressing these patterns, not just writing checks that enable their continuation. You think we want handouts? Dad asked, his voice rising slightly. We're not asking for charity. What exactly are you asking for? I countered calmly. The direct question created another uncomfortable silence. They had approached this conversation with implicit expectations rather than explicit requests. Another familiar pattern. We thought, Mom began hesitantly, with Veronica's new position and increased salary, you thought I would simply pay off your debts, I finished for her, without questioning how they accumulated or what would prevent the same situation from recurring. We're your parents, Dad said, an edge entering his voice. When you needed help with college, we provided what we could. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. You provided what you chose to after redirecting 2/3 of my college fund to Sarah, I corrected, keeping my tone measured despite the surge of old resentment. That was your choice, not mine. And I benefited. From that choice, Sarah acknowledged before our parents could respond. A choice that ultimately shaped both our futures, mine with opportunities I couldn't capitalize on effectively, Veronica's with obstacles she had to overcome through extraordinary effort. The acknowledgement from Sarah, publicly recognizing both the advantage she had received and her failure to translate it into sustainable success, shifted the emotional temperature of the confrontation. We didn't come here to assign blame, I said after a moment. We came to help find solutions that address both the immediate crisis and the underlying issues. What kind of solutions? Mom asked cautiously. First, legal remedies for the predatory mortgage, I explained. Alex's colleague believes there are grounds for challenging the foreclosure based on lending violations. That could buy time to restructure the debt. Second, medical expense reduction, Sarah continued. Veronica has identified patient assistance programs that could significantly decrease Dad's medication costs. We've already completed the preliminary applications. Third, a claim against the fraudulent investment advisor, I added. The regulatory investigation may eventually lead to restitution, but we can file an independent civil claim now. Alex has provided contact information for attorneys who handle such cases on contingency. Our parents listened with growing attention as we outlined practical steps rather than simply offering a financial bailout. The approach, addressing specific problems with targeted solutions rather than general rescue, represented a fundamentally different model of assistance than they had anticipated. These are all helpful suggestions, Dad said carefully, but they don't address the immediate foreclosure threat or our depleted savings. That brings us to the fourth element, I acknowledged. Financial support with conditions. Conditions? Mom repeated, wariness evident in her tone. Yes, Sarah confirmed. Any direct financial assistance would come with requirements for financial counseling, complete transparency regarding accounts and decisions, and a structured repayment plan when possible. The framework we were proposing inverted the dynamic from 10 years earlier. When they had taken my college fund, it had been presented as necessary redistribution with vague promises of future restitution that never materialized. Now we are offering assistance with clear expectations and accountability measures. "You're treating us like children who can't be trusted," Dad said, his pride clearly wounded. "We're treating you like adults who have made significant financial mistakes and need structured support to recover," I corrected. "The same way you might treat a business client who had mismanaged company resources." "The alternative," Sarah added with unusual directness, "is that we simply say no, which is also our right as adults with our own financial responsibilities." The statement hung in the air, definitive boundary setting from the daughter who had benefited most from their financial favoritism. Its impact was evident in our parents' expressions, a mixture of shock and dawning realization that the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. The confrontation had reached its pivotal moment. Either they would accept the new paradigm we were establishing, help with accountability rather than rescue without questions, or they would reject it and face their financial collapse without our support. "We need to discuss this privately," Mom said finally. "Of course," I agreed. "Take whatever time you need. Sarah and I will wait outside." As we stepped onto the back patio, closing the sliding door behind us, Sarah exhaled slowly. "That was intense," she murmured. "Necessary, but intense." I nodded, watching our parents through the glass as they engaged in animated conversation. They never expected us to present a united front with conditions attached. "Do you think they'll accept?" Sarah asked. "I think they have few alternatives," I replied. "But acceptance isn't the same as understanding. Real change will take time and consistent boundaries." As we waited for our parents' decision, I reflected on how completely the dynamics had reversed from that kitchen table conversation 10 years earlier. Then, I had been the one presented with non-negotiable terms regarding my financial future. Now, our parents faced similar constraints, assistance conditional on accountability and changed behavior. The difference was that our conditions were designed to create healthier patterns rather than perpetuate dysfunction. Whether they could recognize that distinction would determine not just the resolution of their financial crisis, but the future of our family relationships. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and purples as Sarah and I waited on our parents' patio. 20 minutes had passed since we'd left them to discuss our proposed terms. 20 minutes of watching them through the glass as they gestured, argued, and occasionally glanced in our direction. "They're taking longer than I expected," Sarah observed, fidgeting with her watch strap. "That could be good or bad. They're adjusting to a new reality," I replied. "It's not easy having your self-image challenged." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You know what's strange? Throughout this whole conversation, I keep thinking about that kitchen table moment from your perspective. How it must have felt to have your future decided by others with such certainty." "I never allowed myself to fully process it at the time," I admitted. "It was easier to compartmentalize, to focus on finding alternate paths forward." "The practical one," Sarah said with a sad smile. "Always solving problems instead of expressing feelings about them." Before I could respond, the sliding door opened. Our parents emerged looking subdued but composed. The animated disagreement we'd witnessed had apparently reached some resolution. "We'd like to continue the conversation," Mom said, her voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps we could all sit out here? It's a beautiful evening." We rearranged ourselves around the patio table. The physical dynamics had shifted slightly. No longer us versus them across a divide, but a more circular arrangement suggesting dialogue rather than confrontation. Dad cleared his throat. "We've discussed your proposal, and while some aspects are difficult to accept, we recognize the thought and care behind your approach." "We appreciate that recognition," I said cautiously. "However," he continued. The conditions you've outlined feel unnecessarily stringent. We're not irresponsible children who need supervision. We've had one significant financial setback after decades of stability. One significant setback that threatens to cost you your home and retirement security, Sarah pointed out. And our analysis identified multiple decisions that contributed to this situation, not just the investment fraud. Mom leaned forward. What if we accepted some elements of your plan but modified others? For instance, we're willing to pursue legal remedies against the mortgage company and investment advisor. We'll apply for the patient assistance programs, but the financial oversight component feels excessive. The negotiation attempt was predictable. Accept the assistance while rejecting the accountability. It represented another familiar pattern, addressing symptoms rather than underlying causes. The oversight isn't punitive, I explained calmly. It's protective, for all of us. Financial counseling provides expert guidance you clearly need. Transparency ensures we're all working with the same information, and a repayment plan, however modest, maintains your dignity and independence. Your father and I have managed our finances for 40 years, Mom countered, a defensive edge entering her voice. One mistake doesn't erase that history. It's not just one mistake, Sarah said quietly. It's a pattern of decisions that prioritized immediate desires over long-term security, the same pattern that led to taking Veronica's college fund for my education. The parallel clearly made our parents uncomfortable. Dad shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. That was different, Mom insisted. That was about investing in your future, Sarah. Was it? I asked. Or was it about fulfilling your dreams vicariously through Sarah while assuming I would succeed regardless? The question hung in the air, direct but not accusatory. For perhaps the first time, I was asking them to examine their motivations honestly rather than accepting their justifications at face value. Dad sighed heavily. We believed we were making the right choice at the time, for the family as a whole. I understand that, I acknowledged. And I believe you're sincere. But good intentions don't change outcomes. My education and early career were significantly harder because of that decision. Choices have consequences, even when made with the best intentions. And my path wasn't exactly smooth despite the advantages, Sarah added unexpectedly. The pressure of justifying that investment, of proving it was worthwhile to redirect Veronica's future for mine, created its own burden. This admission seemed to catch our parents off guard. They had constructed a narrative over the years that their decision had optimized outcomes for both children, supporting Sarah's special talents while assuming I would succeed through practical determination. Sarah's acknowledgement that this framing had damaged her too disrupted their comfortable conclusion. What exactly would this financial oversight involve? Dad asked after a long moment, his tone suggesting reluctant consideration rather than outright rejection. Monthly sessions with a certified financial counselor, I explained. Quarterly reviews of your progress with Sarah and me. Complete transparency regarding all accounts and financial decisions until the crisis is resolved. And how long would this arrangement last? Mom asked. Until specific milestones are achieved, I replied. Mortgage stabilization. Sustainable. Medical expense management. Restructured retirement planning with appropriate diversification. And the direct financial support? Dad inquired, finally addressing the aspect they had most hoped for while avoiding its mention. I can cover Dad's medication costs for 6 months while the patient assistance applications process, I said. And provide a loan, not a gift, to bring the mortgage current and prevent immediate foreclosure. A loan, Mom repeated, the term clearly not what they had hoped to hear. Yes, Sarah confirmed. With a formal agreement and reasonable repayment, schedule once your situation stabilizes. Sarah will contribute as well, I added, glancing at my sister. She's agreed to manage the administrative aspects of the legal claims and medical applications, since her schedule currently allows that flexibility. This element of our plan, Sarah's non-monetary but valuable contribution, was something we had discussed extensively. It acknowledged her limited financial resources while ensuring she participated meaningfully in addressing the family crisis. Our parents absorbed this information in silence. The comprehensive nature of our proposal, addressing practical needs, while requiring significant behavioral changes, clearly represented a paradigm shift they hadn't anticipated. "We need more time to consider all this," Dad said finally. "It's a lot to process." "That's reasonable," I agreed. "But the foreclosure timeline doesn't allow for extended deliberation. We should have a decision by tomorrow if we're going to implement these solutions effectively." "Tomorrow," Mom nodded, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and resistance. "We can do that." As we prepared to leave, an unexpected moment of vulnerability emerged. Dad, helping me gather my documents, paused and placed his hand on my arm. "Veronica," he said quietly, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Do you resent us? What happened to your college fund?" The directness of the question, the first time either parent had acknowledged the potential emotional impact of their decision rather than just its practical consequences, caught me off guard. "Resentment isn't productive," I replied carefully. "I've focused on building the life I want despite the obstacles." "That's not an answer," he observed, showing more perception than I'd expected. I considered my response thoughtfully. I resented the assumption that my dreams were expendable while Sarah's were essential. I resented discovering that family promises could be unilaterally revised when convenient. But mostly, I resented being told my sacrifice was necessary without being given a meaningful choice in the matter. He nodded slowly, absorbing this without immediate defensiveness. "And now the situations are reversed." "Not exactly," I corrected him. "We're offering choices and transparency, elements that were missing from that kitchen table conversation. The conditions aren't punishment. They're clarifying expectations to prevent future misunderstandings." As Sarah and I drove back to my apartment, the emotional weight of the confrontation finally registered. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Delayed reaction to the intensity of challenging family mythology so directly. "That was harder than I expected," Sarah admitted, staring out the passenger window. "Seeing them struggle with their self-image as perfect parents making flawless decisions. Do you think they'll accept the terms?" I asked. She considered this. "Probably. They have few alternatives. But acceptance isn't the same as understanding." "You said something unexpected back there," I noted. "About the pressure of justifying their investment in your career." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "It was real," she finally said. "Every setback, every rejection felt magnified by the knowledge that your future had been compromised for mine. Mom would say things like, 'We made the right choice investing in your talent,' and all I could think was, 'What if you were wrong?' The revelation created an unexpected connection between us, both damaged in different ways by our parents' decision. Sarah burdened by impossible expectations, me by the absence of support others took for granted. For what it's worth, I said, I think you have genuine talent. The industry is just brutally competitive and often arbitrary in who succeeds. Thanks, she replied with a small smile. And for what it's worth, I think your success is remarkable given the obstacles. Principal investigator at 30 is extraordinary in any context, but especially considering your path. Back at my apartment, we found Alex waiting with dinner ordered from our favorite Thai restaurant. She had arranged the dining table with printouts of legal resources related to our parents' situation, foreclosure prevention options, investment fraud claim procedures, patient assistance program details. How did it go? She asked as we settled. At the table. About as expected, I replied. Initial resistance followed by reluctant consideration of our terms. They're giving us an answer tomorrow. The psychology was fascinating, Sarah added, reaching for her wine glass, watching them confront the parallels between this situation and what happened with Veronica's college fund. Alex nodded thoughtfully. Did they acknowledge the connection explicitly? Not fully, I said. But Dad asked if I resented them for what happened, the first time either of them has recognized the emotional impact rather than just the practical consequences. That's significant, Alex observed. Breaking through denial is the first step toward genuine behavior change. As we ate, the conversation shifted to implementation details, which legal remedies to pursue first, how to structure the loan agreement if they accepted our terms, the logistics of financial counseling sessions. The practical focus provided welcome relief from the emotional intensity of the confrontation. Later, after Sarah had retired to the guest room and Alex had gone home, I sat on my balcony processing the day's events. The reversal of dynamics was striking, having evolved from the powerless 18-year-old whose future was decided by others to the 30-year-old establishing terms for helping those same decision-makers. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, nor was the opportunity it presented. This wasn't about revenge or enjoying their vulnerability, but about establishing healthier patterns for all of us. If they accepted our terms, it could potentially heal wounds I'd long ago stopped acknowledging even to myself. My phone chimed with a text from my grandmother, Ruth. Sarah called, told me about your meeting with your parents. Proud of you both for handling this with integrity and boundaries. Call me tomorrow with their decision. Her support, consistent across the years when others had been conditional, reinforced the rightness of our approach. This wasn't just about addressing a financial crisis. It was about reshaping family dynamics that had damaged all of us in different ways. The next morning brought a text from Dad. Your mother and I have discussed your proposal extensively. We're prepared to accept your terms with one modification. Can we meet at 10 a.m. to discuss? I forwarded the message to Sarah, who replied immediately. One modification doesn't sound unreasonable depending on what it is. Team Williams siblings round 2? The phrase brought an unexpected smile. Despite our different paths and the historical imbalance in family support, we were approaching this challenge together, each contributing our respective strengths toward a healthier resolution than either of us could have achieved alone. Team Williams siblings, I texted back. 10 a.m. it is. As I prepared for the second meeting, I reflected on the dramatic shift in dynamics that had occurred in just 24 hours. The confrontation had been necessary, painful but essential for exposing patterns that had shaped our family for decades. The aftermath, while still unfolding, suggested possibilities for healing that I hadn't dared hope for previously. Whatever modification our parents proposed, whatever happened next, something fundamental had already changed. Truth had been spoken aloud after years of polite silence. Boundaries had been established where none had existed before. And perhaps most significantly, Sarah and I had found common ground in addressing family dysfunction, rather than being positioned as competitors in an unfair system of parental favoritism. The initial aftermath of confrontation had created an opening for something new to emerge. Not just solutions to a financial crisis, but potentially a healthier family system for all of us. The presentation room at the National Cancer Research Conference buzzed with anticipation. Medical professionals, researchers, and pharmaceutical representatives filled the seats, their attention focused on the stage where I stood beside a display showing dramatic before and after scans of tumor reduction. The targeted delivery system has now been implemented in 17 treatment centers nationwide, I explained, advancing to the next slide. Patient outcomes show consistent improvement across all demographics, with side effect reduction averaging 58% compared to traditional chemotherapy protocols. 10 years had passed since that pivotal confrontation with my parents. 10 years of professional advancement as our breakthrough research moved from laboratory to clinical trials to standard treatment protocol. What had begun as a promising research project had evolved into a medical innovation now helping thousands of cancer patients annually. As I concluded my presentation, the applause was gratifying, but secondary to the satisfaction of seeing our work making tangible differences in patients' lives. Dr. Patel, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, nodded approvingly from the front row. Beside her sat Alex, who had transitioned from girlfriend to fiancée to wife during the decade of development, her legal expertise proving invaluable as we navigated the complex patent and regulatory landscape. After fielding questions from the audience, I gathered my materials and joined them in the hotel lobby. "Flawless as usual," Dr. Patel commented, her typical reserve softened by genuine pride. "I've mentored dozens of researchers over my career, but none who have translated theoretical work to practical application as effectively as you have." "I had exceptional guidance," I replied, the compliment sincere rather than perfunctory. "Are you ready for the family dinner tonight?" Alex asked as we walked toward the hotel exit. "Your parents seemed excited when they arrived yesterday." The question carried layers of meaning beyond its simple words. Family gatherings had transformed dramatically since that confrontation 10 years earlier, evolving from tension-filled obligations to something approaching genuine connection. "As ready as ever," I replied. Sarah texted that she's bringing her new production partner. Apparently, Mom's already planning their wedding despite Sarah insisting they're just colleagues. Alex laughed. "Some patterns are resistant to change. Speaking of which, how's your father doing with the new medication regimen?" "Complaining about the pill schedule but following it religiously," I said. "The cardiac specialist says his numbers have improved significantly." The restaurant I'd selected for our family dinner offered private dining rooms, a deliberate choice that reflected lessons learned over years of navigating complex family dynamics. Public settings had proven problematic during the early stages of rebuilding relationships, when honest conversations sometimes became emotional. My parents were already seated when we arrived, looking older but healthier than they had during the financial crisis years. Dad's cardiac condition was well managed now, and both had adopted lifestyle changes that improved their overall well-being. "There he is," Dad said, rising to embrace me with genuine warmth. "The star researcher makes us all proud." Mom hugged. Me next, then Alex. "We watched the live stream of your presentation from our hotel room. Even though we didn't understand all the technical details, it was clearly impressive." Their pride, once so disproportionately directed toward Sarah's performing ambitions, had gradually expanded to include genuine appreciation for my scientific achievements. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had developed slowly through consistent boundary maintenance and gradually rebuilt trust. Sarah arrived moments later with Michael, her production partner from the educational theater company she had founded 5 years earlier. At 36, she had finally found her niche, not in the bright lights of Broadway as originally envisioned, but creating and performing interactive educational theater programs for schools and community organizations. "Sorry we're late," she said, embracing each of us in turn. The workshop with the science teachers ran long. They had so many questions about integrating performing arts into STEM education. Veronica's presentation went extremely well, Mom informed her, the automatic comparison of her children's achievements a habit not entirely broken. "Of course it did," Sarah replied with a genuine smile. "He's revolutionizing cancer treatment. I'm just teaching kids about mitosis through interpretive dance." Her self-deprecating humor reflected hard-won perspective. After several more years of struggling in commercial theater following our parents' financial crisis, Sarah had eventually reassessed her goals. The educational theater company she founded with grant funding combined her performance training with unexpected administrative talents, creating sustainable success that eluded her in traditional performing arts. As dinner progressed, our conversation flowed with an ease that would have seemed impossible during those tense confrontations a decade earlier. The family dynamics had not been magically perfected. Occasional friction points still emerged, old patterns sometimes resurfaced. But the fundamental relationships had been rebuilt on healthier foundations. The financial crisis that had precipitated our intervention had ultimately been resolved through a combination of approaches. The predatory mortgage was successfully challenged, resulting in modified terms. Dad's medication costs were substantially reduced through patient assistance programs. Legal action against the fraudulent investment advisor eventually recovered about 30% of their losses. My loan to prevent immediate foreclosure was repaid in full, gradually and with interest, as their situation stabilized. More importantly, they had completed the required financial counseling, maintained transparency about their decisions, and developed sustainable retirement practices that prevented similar crises from recurring. The oversight that had initially felt excessive to them had ultimately provided the structure needed to rebuild financial stability. "Your grandmother Ruth would be proud of all of us," Mom observed during a lull in conversation. Ruth had passed away 3 years earlier at 89, having lived long enough to witness the family's transformation. She always said Veronica would play the long game successfully. She was right about many things, I acknowledged, remembering my grandmother's clear-eyed assessment of family dynamics when everyone else was obscuring truth with comfortable fictions. As dessert arrived, Dad cleared his throat. "Before we finish dinner, your mother and I have an announcement." Sarah and I exchanged curious glances. Even after a decade of improved communication, parental announcements triggered reflexive wariness. "We've decided to establish a scholarship fund," Mom continued, "the Williams Family Educational Trust." This was unexpected. Their financial recovery had been solid but not extravagant. A scholarship fund represented significant commitment. "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "For performing arts students?" "Actually, no," Dad replied. "For students pursuing scientific or medical education who demonstrate financial need." The significance wasn't lost on any of us. After decades of prioritizing artistic pursuits, from their own deferred dreams to their disproportionate investment in Sarah's career, they were acknowledging the value of the path I had chosen despite their earlier dismissal of it as merely practical. "The initial funding is modest," Mom explained, "but we're allocating a percentage of our retirement distributions to build it over time." "What inspired this?" I asked, genuinely curious about the motivation behind this symbolic correction of past imbalances. Dad met my gaze directly. 10 years ago, when we faced financial ruin, you taught us something profound through how you responded. You showed us that true strength isn't in grand gestures or special talents, but in consistent ethical choices and boundaries. We want to support students who demonstrate that same integrity. The acknowledgement, coming a decade after our confrontation but emerging from genuine reflection rather than crisis management, represented healing I hadn't realized I still needed. After dinner, as Alex and I walked back to our hotel, she squeezed my hand. "That scholarship is their way of trying to restore balance, you know. A belated recognition of the educational opportunity they redirected." "I know," I replied quietly. "It won't change what happened, but it suggests they truly understand the impact of their choices now." "Full circle," she observed. "From taking your educational funds to establishing educational funds for others following similar paths." The symmetry was indeed striking. The 18-year-old who had surrendered his college fund could never have imagined that the 30-year-old who confronted his parents' financial crisis would eventually inspire this form of restitution. Not direct repayment, but something potentially more meaningful, acknowledgement of value and worth previously denied. As we reached our hotel, my phone chimed with a text from Sarah. "Team Williams siblings forever. Proud of you and all you've accomplished despite everything. Lunch tomorrow before your flight?" The simple message encapsulated our transformed relationship, from competitors in an unfair system of parental favoritism to allies who had found mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's different paths. "Lunch sounds perfect," I replied. 10 years after that pivotal confrontation, the family narrative had been fundamentally rewritten. Not erasing the past injuries, but acknowledging them honestly. Not pretending perfection, but embracing growth. Not demanding sacrifice without choice, but offering support with respect. The $40,000 taken from my college fund had altered my path irrevocably. The detours had been challenging, sometimes painfully so. But the journey had ultimately led to unexpected destinations, professional success beyond what I might have achieved on the original path, personal growth forged through adversity, and family relationships transformed through truth and boundaries rather than accommodation and silence. Sometimes, the long game brings victories sweeter than we could have imagined when the initial defeat seemed so devastating. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.